Hello, I'm Anna White. I am the counsel for the Kentucky Democratic Auxiliary, a nonprofit organization formed to build the party from the ground up. We're very excited to have you join us today in our first 2023 training. We will be walking through anti-harassment and cultural competency for county party committees, executive committees, or any other interested Democrats. There we go. From the current slide. Oh, it worked. I'm a genius. All right. Today we are talking about anti-harassment and cultural competency training. Your insurance company, your lawyer, your members, and the public that you work with are very interested in you knowing about this subject and knowing how to protect yourself and protect others, first and foremost. But as importantly, how to present yourself, your team, your county executive committee, and all Democrats in a very positive, respectful, forward-looking manner. It's vital that we all have this very basic training and that we all know how to move forward in the same way, respecting others and the space around us. All right, I am Anna Stewart Wrights. I'm the Kentucky Democratic Auxiliary Council, and I'm also chair of the County Party Training Subcommittee. I'm honored to work with a group of other county party officials, interested consultants and field experts, media experts, and others as we train county parties on how best to keep themselves safe and do their job. First, we'll talk about board member liability. It's very important to remember that when you're serving on a county party, whether in a subcommittee, in an officer position, or just as a member, you're responsible for what you do and say, and you're also responsible to some extent about what those around you do and say. And so this type of training reminds us of that weight we carry on our shoulders, that duty that we have to comply with as we do our job as Democrats. Board members are liable and responsible for what they do and what other board members do. The county party committee or executive committee or whatever you call your organization is a board. It's essentially a nonprofit board that works to forward and increase Democrats across the Commonwealth. And so when you're on this board, you are responsible for your own actions. You're responsible for your peers, those who serve on the board with you. You're also responsible for other members who don't serve on the board or are not officers, and for subordinates. And this isn't a real employment relationship, but it's the same kind of responsibility. Those who work for you, whether it's a short task like, Joe, will you go make these copies, or on a day-to-day basis, are essentially your subordinates. You are watching over them, you are directing them, you are asking them to do things, and you are therefore also responsible for their actions. And importantly, you're responsible for your volunteers. Every county party has volunteers who pitch in to set up tables at an event or provide snacks or do your social media page. We really rely and lean heavily on our volunteers. And as a board, we are responsible for making sure that those volunteers act in a socially responsible and legally responsible manner. And we're also responsible for our vendors. We're responsible if we hire a printing company, if we hire an event coordinator. We're responsible for that person or that entity in their actions. We can't hire somebody who behaves poorly and then say, oh, that's not us. We're not responsible for that. If you hire them, if you ask them to work, then you are responsible for making sure that they behave appropriately. And if they don't, for telling them, I'm sorry, you don't work for us anymore. Here's why, goodbye. And lastly, if you have any staff, you're responsible for the actions of staff. As a board, you oversee what folks do. So if your county party is big enough that you hire staff, you are also responsible for making sure your staff is appropriately trained and educated so that they avoid acting in a harassing fashion and so that they are culturally competent. What is harassment? And that's a question that lawyers and judges and the public spend a long time arguing. What is harassment? And it basically boils down to three things. If it's unwanted, it's harassment. It doesn't matter if you mean it in a pleasant way, you're well-intentioned. If you say, gosh, Sue, that dress really flatters your figure, and you mean, man, you look good and I wish I looked like that. Sue can still perceive that as harassment. Sue didn't ask you, hey, do I look good in this dress? And so it's improper of you to reference particularly physical characteristics of how she looks in that dress. So we have to be careful when we're giving compliments or tossing off pleasantries to people that they are wanted statements, that we and that person agree that this would be an okay thing to say. And if somebody is concerned about that, then I encourage them really think about your compliments, your directions, your references to a person or that person's behavior. Be centered on action and not on appearance. And it's very hard to remember to say, man, you look pretty is not something we should say. We should say, I love that your energy for this project lights up a room. I am encouraged when I see how you bring people up. I'm delighted that you really were able to pour oil on troubled waters in that discussion. And those are the compliments that mean a lot too, right? Beauty, appearance can change over time, said the old lady. But actions really matter, and actions are what we should praise. And that's something to really carry across all your committee activities. Let's change the focus to what people are doing, why we like them to do that, and praise them for that. It's harassment if it upsets others. And often, particularly on a board, we're very used to our peers, right? We spend time with them. They're our friends. They think like us. Often we're a clique. And so we may develop our own catchphrases or jokes or the way we speak to each other and forget that that may be upsetting to third parties. And we see that when I was growing up, we teased each other by calling each other a dork or a nerd or, the R word for mentally disabled. We know now how wildly improper that is. But you still find people of a certain age using those phrases and not stopping to think, will this upset others? And so it's very important to watch our speech and encourage our peers to watch our speech so that we don't accidentally do things or say things that upset others. And that extends particularly to your interacting with the public. It's very hard often today as a Democrat not to say, those stupid so-and-sos who voted for that jerk. But we forget that not everyone thinks exactly like us all the time. And we can inadvertently insult another Democrat by saying exactly what I said there. So we have to be very careful to be respectful because we don't know what's in everyone else's head. So we try not to upset others. And if they say, I am upset, then we stop doing it. And even well-meaning actions can be harassment. It's very hard to stand by while somebody with a physical disability, say, is trying to navigate a text. But it's important that we remember that is a person, that is an adult. They are doing their job and living their lives. And we shouldn't step in and say, everybody should carry that for Anna because she's weak or her arm doesn't work right. You can mean it so kindly, but it's still harassment. It's still objectionable to that person because you're belittling them. You're saying they're not capable. It's different if somebody asks you, will you, can you, would you? But we can't reach out and say to the room at large, do this because that person is not capable. So harassment is essentially anything that makes anyone else feel bad. It's what your grandma and mine told you. Live by the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And think about that. There are so many things that people do, and it just makes us aggressive. We just think, I wish they wouldn't. But we rarely think to step out and say, hey, please don't talk to me that way, or don't act that way. I find it upsetting. So think about how many of those things that you live with in your daily life. And imagine everyone around you has that litany of things that make them bristle. So treat people like you would like to be treated. And it doesn't matter whether it's somebody of the opposing party who's come into your county meeting to sit there with their arms crossed and, make fun of you, or whether it's your best friend. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Also, think before you speak. And that is very important because so often our mouths are so much faster than our hearts or our minds. And we just blurt things out. And we've all had that moment of, oh, I want to roll back time. And so, really, in a group setting as a board member, when you're representing Democrats, all of us, because your whole county is looking at you, and whatever you do, they'll be like, that's what Democrats are like. So you're representing not just yourself, your board, your county party, or even every Democrat in your county. You're representing all of us across Kentucky. So think before you speak. And if it seems as you reflect, that might hurt someone, don't say it. Hold that back and really check yourself. And all of us say dumb things or harass somebody accidentally, inappropriately touch someone, hug someone who doesn't like being hugged, or say something that on second thought may have sounded a little risque. We all do this. And it's very, very important to apologize or remediate promptly. If something terrible comes out of your mouth, immediately say, I am so sorry. I apologize, and be sincere. Don't dwell on it. You don't have to talk about it for 5 minutes. Just immediately say, I am sorry. I should not have done that. I apologize, and move on. Because acknowledging that we all make mistakes and that you see that you made one can make a real difference to a hearer, a listener who might otherwise feel harassed or upset. Harassment isn't limited to one gender. Often we think, it's men that harass women if you're talking about sexual harassment. And that's so not true. I've been practicing law for 33 years, and a number of those years were delightful in that I got to help the legislature, Democrats, but also some Republicans, as they navigated various legal issues. And the number of harassment complaints against legislators that came to me and other attorneys, it was 50-50 women and men. I went into it thinking the women will be great, the men will be awful. That was not the case. And that's true across the spectrum of harassment. It is not limited to one gender. It's not men harassing women all the time or women harassing men all the time. It can be women harassing women. And so we need to change our mindset and think more broadly about what constitutes harassment and how we address that. And it's not limited to one race. You can be of any race and harass or upset another person. It's not always white people versus black people or Asians versus Hispanics. We need to recognize anyone can be harassed and anyone can be a harasser. And if we think about that and take a moment, it will really sink in that this is a serious issue. We need to watch what we say and really think about what we say when we are in a public capacity, when we're sharing with the world at large. And remember that you're sharing with people of all genders or no gender, and people of all races, and often people of all ages. So make sure your presentation, your discussion, the words you use, and your use of physical space as you come close to people or touch them or manipulate them is appropriate and is what you would want a complete stranger to do to you. So follow Grandma's golden rule. Here's a very long slide on sexual harassment, and it provides the exact definition that the U.S. Equal Opportunity Commission uses. That is the federal agency that recognizes and investigates primarily sexual harassment. Here is how the EEOC defines harassment. It is unlawful to harass a person, an applicant or an employee, but we can broaden that to a member of the public or the board because of that person's sex or gender. Harassment can include sexual harassment, unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature. But harassment does not have to be of a sexual nature. It can include offensive remarks about a person's sex. For example, it is illegal to harass a woman by making offensive comments about women in general. Both the victim and the harasser can be either a woman or a man, and the victim and the harasser can be of the same sex. So harassment is very broad, and this is just talking about sexual harassment. If you include all other kinds of harassment, it can be a very broad field. So we need to not go into the preconceived notion that only men can harass women or only bosses can harass subordinates. Anyone can harass anyone, and it is all improper, particularly in the nonprofit board setting. There are specific Kentucky laws which punish harassment. The Kentucky Civil Rights Act, which we call KRS, so KRS Chapter 344, talks about the civil rights of Kentuckians and how we respect those, how we don't violate someone's civil rights by harassing them sexually, or harassing them because of their gender or gender preferences, or their race, or their age, or their disability. And that harassment prohibition extends through employment, it extends through promotions, it extends into day-to-day life. And it's just a reminder by the legislature back when we were really focused on how to do the right thing and protect everyone when we enacted laws. We started this Civil Rights Act in the state that says, treat everyone fairly. And while most harassment that we see, certainly in the legal context, is either sexual or racial in nature or gender-based in nature, there are other kinds as well. And the Civil Rights Act may not directly punish those, but if somebody is going to sue you or file a complaint that you are harassing them, they'll probably make reference to the Civil Rights Act and say, you are abridging or violating my civil rights by treating me this way. And we need to make sure that that's a serious accusation that we keep in our minds, because we are in a position of authority and power and respect, and we need to act accordingly. And if it gets really bad, the Kentucky statutes also have criminal laws which punish harassment, again, primarily sexual, KRS 52507. And a lot of other civil claims and complaints that people make about misconduct or torts that other people have done to harm them often include harassment. You see harassment in divorce petitions, or in failure to hire, or in assault, just in all sorts of complaints, because there are so many ways we can hurt people without ever putting our hands on them. And as we all know, words and actions often hurt a lot more than physical harm. We'd all sooner be knocked over, I would imagine, than hear somebody say something that violates us. And so it's very important to remember that we're learning as a board, as a county committee, to act appropriately and act kindly and act respectfully, but we are also reminding ourselves and each other there are very real consequences to breaching harassment laws. There are very real penalties that apply if you reference someone's figure inappropriately, or you hang inappropriate pictures on a calendar on the wall that people are forced to look at every time they come into your office. There are real consequences to that, which include money, fines, damages to your reputation, removal from office, or even criminal. So we need to take this seriously and think about what we're doing and what our peers are doing. There are a lot of risk factors for harassment to go unchecked in the nonprofit and political space. We're not technically employers or employees, and that kind of is a loosey-goosey place to be that can let people act inappropriately without anybody catching them quickly or corralling that conduct. Some of the risk factors are there's often a lack of policy. Most county parties don't have an anti-harassment policy that says thou shalt not do this. And that is a problem, because your members can say in good faith or in bad faith, if they want to try and get away with something, You don't have a policy. I don't know what I'm supposed to do and what I'm not allowed to do. So you can't be mad at me for what I did. There's also in most county party policy manuals, not a reporting policy or structure. You typically want a policy that says, if you feel you are being harassed or you have observed someone harassing a third party, you tell a specific person, I have seen this, and that person is charged with addressing it, either investigating it, reporting it to law enforcement, calling in legal counsel to discuss it, calling KDP to discuss it, doing something. But you need that very clear reporting structure so people know what to do when something goes wrong. And it's vital that everyone who deals with you, the public included, knows that there is a policy that they can ask for and read and look at and follow to report this concern. So you have a policy that says, generally, you don't have to list everything that could possibly be harassment, but generally we will not harass people. And if we do, this is how you report it, and this is how we address it. And it's a risk factor for your organization if you don't have that policy. Another risk in nonprofits and politics are we often have leaders that folks are in awe or respect or fear. We've all been a fan of some politician who's come in and thought, I can't believe she's talking to me. I'm next to her. Oh, and we have that awe, we have that respect, we have that excitement. And if we saw our hero doing something we didn't like, it would be very, very hard, even if we had a reporting policy, to follow that. And so that places us at risk because county parties are led by leaders in the community, typically, and they're led by people who have respect and people that may even be feared because they are very good at what they do. And we're also in awe of their dedication. They're giving their time free to this cause for us the people. And that makes it very hard to report. And that is a risk factor for a nonprofit. There's also a very homogenous workplace often. And so if you're around a lot of people of your age and your race and your gender, you may get a little sloppy about what is accepted and what is not. And a newcomer, say, coming into a room of 8 very homogenous people, would have a very hard time saying, I think one of you is doing something wrong, because they fear all 8 of you would turn at them and say, nuts to you. And so that is an additional risk factor. Often also, particularly these days when Democrats are struggling to grow, we feel like we're under attack from the outside world all the time. And so there is a lack of support in our party for dissent or discussion. If you criticize a Democrat, particularly an important Democrat, an officer in the party, of something or dissent with them, the rest of the party may look at you in shock and horror. How could you? You're such a bad person. You're a traitor to our cause. And that the fear of being perceived that way can make it difficult for people to bring valid complaints, valid dissent and discussion to the group. So make sure your group is thinking of these risk factors and being very careful about inviting dissent, inviting discussion, making it clear that we want to hear when you think we're doing something wrong. And a lot of policies don't have the ability to anonymously report. And in a county committee, that's a small group of people. And if you report, everyone's going to say, well, it was Joni that did it. Joni made this report. And so you need some anonymous reporting, whether that's a note stuck under the door or, something sent in the mail anonymously to your county party PO box, whatever it is. You want the ability for people to complain anonymously. And, there may be invalid complaints or mean-spirited or stirring the pot complaints that aren't valid, but take it from the lawyer. You would much sooner have 10 invalid complaints in order to get one valid one, address it, and make people feel better. So think about having that anonymous reporting as well. differentiate discipline and conduct that is disciplining somebody from harassment. Even in a nonprofit, even when we're all volunteers, there are bosses and subordinates to some level. And those folks who are in charge of others need to be able to say, you did this wrong and you must fix it. Or I can't believe you didn't deposit the contributions. I'm taking you out of that position. And both of those things are discipline. It's conduct that is mean and directed personally at somebody and saying hurtful things or doing hurtful things. But that is not always or necessarily harassment. And so as your team talks through what is harassment and what your policy should be, recognize that there will be situations in which somebody is going to be, quote unquote, disciplining someone else. And that is not harassment. And there's an appropriate way to discipline someone. You don't say, you didn't deposit the checks, you're ugly and your hair is a funny color. You say, you didn't deposit the checks, I'm going to give that job to Steve from now on because he has an office next to the bank and it will be easy for him to deposit. So you need to differentiate appropriate negative talk or action from harassment. There's also the problem of microaggressions. And my goddaughter is Black, and she started her medical career in a medical school in Utah, and she was the only Black medical student. And everyone was very, very, very nice all the time. She didn't have anyone say anything overtly racist to her. But there were a lot of microaggressions like, oh, you wear that? Do your people wear that? Does your family eat like that? Or even just extra kindness. Desi's the only one from, and they'd go a long way, Kentucky. So let's let her take the first turn. And all those teeny weeny insults, or even if they weren't insults, ways of treating her slightly differently from her peers added up. And after a year, she had to switch medical schools. And the administration was genuinely shocked. We were so nice to you. Why are you leaving? And she was trying to explain microaggressions to them. And I'm not sure it took, but I hope it did. But we have to recognize that we can do tiny little things that are mean or differentiate someone or exclude them or harass them without it being an overt, ugh, I don't like you. It can be so many tiny things and it can result in the same outcome. They feel harassed, they feel hurt, they feel excluded. And there's also that failure to take responsibility that can be harassing. If you say, like the medical school did, we were so nice, that was not harassment. You're not taking responsibility because you did those actions. And the way they impacted someone else's life was to harass and hurt them. And we can't say to that person, no, it didn't hurt you. That didn't happen. We cannot diminish or belittle their feeling of hurt because we don't think we hurt them. And so you have to take responsibility for your actions. But you also have to look out for inappropriate use of claims of discrimination, because unfortunately there are people who, if they don't like what you do or say, or who you named to be subcommittee chair, or which candidate you support, are going to say you are discriminating against so-and-so in this manner. And you have to be able to sit down with your group, your committee, and talk about, are we, is this discrimination, or are we just taking action that someone disagrees with? And it's very situational and fact specific. And so there will be those instances where you may have to talk it through before you see whether it is an appropriate claim that actually shows harassment or a claim that actually does not show harassment and was made for some other reason. What is sexual harassment? Here is the EOC slide and discussion again, just reminding us it can be any behavior that is sexual in any way and comes from anyone of any gender or sex. And so if sexual harassment is that broad, then other types of harassment are equally broad. And although they're talked about a little less, they're just as real, just as harmful, and we need to watch out for them just as much. Sexual harassment is the biggie. Obviously, we worry about that, particularly in terms of board insurance or criminal charges. And that can include unwelcome touching. I'm a very tactile person. I'm the oldest of 8, and I have animals and kids and grandkids, and I just touch everybody all the time. And I have to remember, if they're not my family asking for hugs, that we should not touch people in any way unless they invite us to. I was very touched. My mom, who is 80, came to visit, and my son is in his 20s, and he doesn't like to be touched. And my mom went for him, and then she remembered, and she stopped, and she put her hands on her shoulders, and she said, "May I give you a hug?" And just seeing the way we can change our behavior if we think about it was wonderful. He said, of course, and they had a great hug and a great time. But touching is a big issue. Jokes and suggestive comments, whether they're about sex or jokes about other things and other types of harassment, are very troubling. And you'll often find the person who does it saying, "It's just a joke. Why are you taking it so seriously?" Without realizing that that person, the victim, may be bringing some history to the meeting that makes them very vulnerable to certain jokes or comments. In the legal field, you learn in your first year something called the eggshell skull theory, which it goes, you could take a hammer and lightly tap most people on the head. And most of them would be, ow, and get a bump, and that would be it. But some people have a skull as thin as an eggshell due to congenital conditions. And if you tap them like that, you could kill them. And it probably came from some horrible case where somebody did. But we need to remember that you can't tell if somebody is fragile or is being triggered or is, very delicate when it comes to any kind of joke, comment, touch behavior. And so we need to treat everybody as carefully as we can while maintaining appropriate lives and getting our job done without saying it's just a joke. Don't take it so seriously. If somebody is taking it seriously, you need to change your behavior because you are in a board, you are in a nonprofit, you are in the political space. Act right. You have to. Pictures and posters that are explicit or inappropriate. And that means if you're on your laptop in the meeting and a picture pops up and the person next to you gets hurt or offended or harmed by it, you did wrong, even though it's your laptop and your picture that you presumably think is appropriate or funny for you. When we're in the public space, we act in a very careful, appropriate manner. Requests for dates, that's a huge thing in the sexual harassment field. You just can't pressure people to do something, to date you or to join your committee or anything else. You have to be respectful of a no. The no means no applies also to, will you be on my committee? Come on. Ask a couple times and then let it go. Intrusive questions about private life or a person's body are certainly harassment and can be sexual harassment. If it's theirs, that is not your business. And you certainly shouldn't be bringing it up in the committee or board or nonprofit space. And emails, texts, and calls that are unwanted are often a symptom of harassment. If somebody does not solicit an email or says, stop emailing me, stop texting me, stop calling me, we need to respect that. What other types of harassment or discrimination are out there? Typically, we think of racial, which is, any kind of race versus any other kind of race. And it can be discrimination by anyone of one race against anyone of any other race. Religious discrimination, we see that a lot these days in Kentucky. It's very easy to say, I'm a blank and you're a blank and your faith is terrible and mine's great. Or I have no faith and you have faith and so I'm great and you're terrible, or vice versa. And we have to be very respectful of people's religious differences. There are so many religions in the world. It would be good for us Democrats, regardless of what our personal faith is, to allow all the other faiths to also exist without making nasty comments or harassing them. Gender, as we see in Kentucky in the 2023 legislative session, is a huge issue. And I am proud of Democrats who seem to be really standing up and saying, we are not going to harass folks because of their gender. But as we move forward to successive years or the rest of this year, we need to carry that good intent and appropriate behavior forward. A disability, lots of folks are discriminated against by disability because of disability. And that one is sometimes hard to differentiate between I am helping so-and-so and I am discriminating against them and not treating them like an adult. And so we need to be very careful when we discuss or address disabilities in any way. And wait, often people discriminate against folks who are too much either way. My daughter is a professional dancer, ballerina, and you would be shocked by how many people during her 30 years of life have come up and said, oh, you're so skinny. Oh, I wish I was you. That is wonderful. Or even, you're so skinny, I guess you'd never eat. And she is beautiful and she is thin. But to her, that's very hurtful, particularly as she and many other dancers struggled with eating disorders. The field just full of that. And so what they thought they were saying was, aren't you gorgeous and thin? And what she was hearing was, there is something wrong with you. You are so skinny. And so we need to be very careful discussing any physical attribute of the person, because what we think we're saying is nice and what they're hearing may be very, very harmful or harassing. The Kentucky Civil Rights Act prohibits employers with 8 or more employees from discriminating in employment on the basis of sex. Well, most county parties do not have more than 8 employees, but we typically apply that same type of standard to all organizations, even though you may not be sued for civil rights violations specifically. If your organization doesn't have 8 or more folks or employees, you still can have a claim made against you for discrimination. So anytime you are an organization, you need to be mindful of discrimination in the way you elect people, select people, form subcommittees, or take any political action in furtherance of your county party. Sexual and other harassment is a civil or criminal offense. It can also be defamation. If you sexually harass somebody or say something about their weight or their disability and it damages them in their job or in their lives, then you can have defamed them if it's not true. And you can be sued for defaming them by saying something that is untrue about them in a harassing way. If you say something terrible about somebody, you really don't like how they did your communications. Your comms person was terrible. And you say to everyone you meet, man, our comms person was terrible and blah, 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 this is why. But your comms person has a real job, a paying job for a newspaper. And that newspaper hears, oh my gosh, so-and-so was the comms person for the county party and did a terrible job. And they look at that reporter and think, no, we're not going to keep you. If the public thinks you're doing a terrible job in a volunteer position, I'm not going to pay you to do a terrible job either. And if you interfere with somebody's contract or livelihood or business advantage or employment, you can also be sued for that. So there are many, many ways to get in trouble if you start harassing people. And there are different types of harassment in a workplace that we see fairly often. And by workplace, I mean your unpaid volunteer workplace as well. Quid pro quo. If you do this for me, or you let me do this, then I will give you something. And we really, really want to avoid that. It's very easy to ask people to do things, and those that respond very positively, we promote or put them in the inner circle or name them a subcommittee chair, make them an officer. We need to make sure we're not trading their tolerance of inappropriate behavior for a position. That would be quid pro quo. Hostile work environment where some clique or some person makes it hostile to somebody else. And it doesn't have to be just somebody on your board. If you make your environment hostile to somebody who's coming into a meeting or coming in to participate in an activity or a GOTV event, then you've lost as a voter potentially, but you've also made it a hostile environment for that person or persons. And we want to avoid that. And favoritism. We're human, Everyone has favorites, and we need to make sure that we're not taking "you are my best friend" and changing it into "I'm going to make my best friend my vice president because she's my best friend." We need to not exclude others in a cruel or harassing way through favoritism. Unacceptable versus unlawful. Well, I think we can all agree that harassment is all wrong. It's all bad and we should not do it. And we all will by accident. But some of it will get you sued. And some of it will get us sued as an organization, either the county party, KDP, the candidate you're working with. We can all get in trouble if you engage in civil or criminal harassment that results in a lawsuit or a claim or law enforcement. So that's why we hammer so hard on the sexual harassment, because that will get everyone sued. But even if it is not action, even if it's just favoritism for your best friend that inadvertently harasses others, we need to remember it's all unacceptable and strive as a board to really think about what we're doing and make sure we're acting appropriately. Nonprofit leaders have an obligation to prevent, and we've talked a lot about that, investigate, look into when people make a complaint, whether it's formally or informally, address, which means make a decision about what we're doing moving forward with it, and report if we need to report it on up the chain or to a lawyer, to a law enforcement. You have a duty. When you are an officer in that county committee or county board, you have a duty to take all these actions. And it's very important to have a policy that guides you in fulfilling that duty. Prevention. Focus on culture. A culture that stresses both respect and accountability is one of the best preventative shields for harassment. If we come from a place of respect for everyone, and we hold our peers accountable and make them have the same respect for everyone, we're probably not going to have harassment. And that's the best way to prevent it. The second best way is policies and procedures. It should be a given that every nonprofit has a policy saying this is harassment, this is how we define it, this is how we prohibit it, and that also allows for reporting of that breach or harassment and promises anyone who reports we will not retaliate against you for reporting. And if you have those policies and you have a culture of respect, you're going to be wonderful and do a good job as you move forward and prevent harassment. Training. Some harassment occurs because harassers are insensitive or they're not aware that their conduct is unwelcome. And so that's why we have this training to kind of explain this is what harassment is. We also train each other. If somebody makes an off-color joke, the rest of the group says, oh, we don't like to say that because it can hurt someone's feelings for this reason. That jokester may realize, oh my gosh, I didn't know that I was doing something wrong. So training is both formal and informal. Orientation. Set the expectations for appropriate conduct early. New staff, new volunteers, and board members should learn about your policy prohibiting harassment, your policy for reporting and addressing harassment, and should receive some sort of formal training in this is what we define harassment as, and this is why we should not engage in it and don't tolerate it. Because if you don't train people, they might not know. They might go forth and accidentally or intentionally do harm. And so we train them so that doesn't happen. How to respond in the moment. And this one is so hard, but we have to immediately respond. We have to address when something bad happens, something harassing happens in a meeting or activity, or you hear of it, you have to respond and address it immediately via your formal policy if you have one, or by getting the smart minds together in a room if you don't, or by simply calling someone out across the boardroom table. We don't say that in this group. You can go back to your kindergarten teacher. We don't say that. But that is often a very effective way to address in the moment. Remediate. If there has been a written or verbal statement or an action, particularly that the public has seen, that harms somebody, immediately remediate. Apologize. Issue a statement that says, we regret that we did this. We've put in training, so we won't do it again. We hope you accept our apology. Immediately remediate. Report it if appropriate. Obviously, apologizing if it's a physical or sexual or other assault or harassment, an apology is not good enough. And that needs to be reported to legal counsel, to law enforcement, to KDP, whoever you report to. Don't conceal those under the guise of, we remediated it, we apologized, we talked about it, so we don't think we should report that, so-and-so attacked so-and-so after the party and a few too many drinks. If it is a serious offense, it should be reported outside the group. You can't promise confidentiality. There are certain required reporters who are morally or legally required to report. And so you teachers and preachers and doctors and lawyers, we all face this. If somebody tells you something that is a crime, particularly a crime against a child, and in the political space, we see that with our teen volunteers sometimes, you can't say to the person who reports it, I promise I won't tell. So really educate your members. We can't promise confidentiality. We try to. Anything that we can keep confidential, we do. But there are some required reporters by virtue of their job, and there are some folks who must report by virtue of their position. If you are the board chair for your board and you know your vice chair is doing something terrible, even if she has apologized, you may have a duty to report that to KDP or the nominating committee and say, she's out, get us somebody new. So that's an important part of prompt response. Your reporting policy should say who should report, and that should really be everyone, and who they should report to, and that should be a specific person. Typically, board chair, secretary, treasurer. Some of my clients who are county parties say, tell our lawyer, and I don't charge for receiving those reports. It's pro bono. Thank you, Kentucky Democratic Auxiliary, for providing free services to our vital county parties. You should say in your policy how you report. Does it need to be typewritten? Can it be verbal? Could it be a text? However you want. There's no required way. And when should you report? And the when should be immediately or as quickly as possible. You don't want to hear 6 months down the road, goodness gracious, Jim has been doing this terrible thing for 6 months to every boy he meets and no one ever reported it. You want it to be prompt. Emphasize non-retaliation. Everyone is scared to report, particularly a friend, for doing something wrong. So in your policy, it needs to say, we don't retaliate. Even if you're wrong when you make a report, we don't retaliate. And you need to enforce that non-retaliation. Don't let it be we won't retaliate. We just won't sit with you at Hardee's anymore. It needs to be enforced non-retaliation. Your policy must, or at least should, contain a standard of conduct, a reporting method, including anonymous, an investigation method, a final report and action. At the end, you need to go back to the person who complained and say, we got your complaint, we investigated, this is how we're addressing it. A remediation or training. Maybe your board just needs another harassment training. And the circling back to the reporter, the complainant, or the victim to say, okay, here's what we did, and it will never happen again. And it's vital that all those are hit in your policy. Here's some terms from a sample policy. I will not read them, but you can print this out and have your team incorporate them into your policy if you're writing it from scratch. I do recommend whatever policy you write that you send it to a lawyer for a review just to make sure it's a good policy and doesn't omit or include things it shouldn't. I do that review again through Kentucky Democratic Auxiliary free. So feel free to email me with them if you don't have a local attorney helping you. At times, you will have to involve counsel, utilize law enforcement, or engage with mental health professionals. Make sure your team knows that those are options available as you address any kind of harassment complaint. Cultural competency, and this really is sort of anti-harassment. And it's more and more important as we educate ourselves and others educate us that we're careful about including others. Cultural competency is just a way of saying, let's be inclusive and respectful. And Cultural competency is usually defined as meaning being sensitive to discrimination against others and learning how to include them. And that can be ignoring a person's right to specific pronouns, to wear their drag queen dresses, to fair treatment, regardless of race, religion, or gender choice. Responsiveness to people and inclusion of people without regard to race, gender, religion, ethnicity, sexual preferences. And I'd like to add, and don't have on the slide, disability. I'm a member of the state, or I work with the state steering committee for the Office of Autism. And we had a very, very good steering committee, and we put in some good autism laws. And then persons with autism came to the committee and said, "Know about us without us. You need people with autism, including nonverbal autists, on your community so that we can tell you how the policies you're making actually impact us or make us feel or exclude us or include us." And they were things like the overhead lights were buzzing, and that prohibited people from being able to come to our meetings. Or we had disabled participants, but we held our meeting in a building without an elevator. And so cultural competency is a way of thinking about who's in my community that I want included in my group. And your group is all Democrats in the county. Who do you want? Well, you want everyone. You want the blind, the deaf, the disabled, the persons with autism, developmental delays. You want everyone. And so you need to look at your meeting place, your policies, how you conduct the meetings, how you speak, and make sure you're including all those folks. And this can include using an online translator if persons who don't have English as a first language want to communicate, or getting a sign language volunteer if you have folks who need sign language interpretation, or using a Zoom and making sure somebody is looking at the comments and reading them in case you have participants who are making comments but are not capable of sharing those verbally. So you need to think about who you want to include and how to do that in a very respectful way. You really need to think about cultural competency in cities and towns and counties with a wide variety of populations. Well, if you're serving beanie weenies and everyone loves them and that's what you eat at every get together, it's kind of like your thing, you may be excluding persons who belong to a faith that doesn't eat pork, or people who hate beans, or diabetics. Beanie weenies have a lot of sugar. And so you really need to think about where we meet, how we communicate, what we do when we meet, what we do for fun, eating, dancing, whatever, and try and include people by being very culturally competent in our decision-making and in our outreach. Cultural respect. Culture is described as a combination of a body of knowledge, a body of belief, and a body of behavior. And in some cases, it's specific to ethnic, racial, religious, geographic, or social groups. And that can be personal identification or language, thoughts, the way we communicate or act, our customs, beliefs, or values. So we need to recruit and promote. I was going to say aggressively, but at least assertively, we need to go out to diverse communities and say, we Democrats want you. Please join us. What can we do to bring you into our meetings, to bring you into our party, to get you engaged with our committee, or even just to ask your opinion on what we're doing? We need to be ambassadors for cultural respect. So we recruit, promote, and support cultural diversity. We offer communication and translation assistance these days. Mr. Google and online will do that for you for free. And we take guidance from outside persons to coach your team in cultural competency, or to translate, or to teach you that some of the words you're using are not appropriate for diversity and inclusion purposes. There's experts out there online and free who can help you with this if your group is struggling, or if someone has reported that there's some harassment going on that you're not reaching out to a certain group of people, or you're discriminating against a group inadvertently or intentionally. Your objectives are to facilitate the integration of people with different cultural backgrounds into your organization. Make them Democrats. Get out the vote. It's also your objective to develop a greater understanding and sensitivity between all the people, those coming in and those who are already in, so that we all respect our different cultural backgrounds. It's important to address harmful words, actions, or behavior immediately. Apologize or say, I didn't know that was offensive to your culture. Will you please explain to me what I should do, or where maybe I can go get education on what I should do so I can do this better. And really, we need to increase the number of members with different cultural backgrounds and facilitate their integration into the party and development in the organization and in the Democratic Party. I took my godson, who was 16 and Black, to the SCEC meeting, and he looked around the room and he said, Miss Anna, there are 2 Black people around this table that has 73 people. And it had not occurred to me. And this kid saw it in 2 seconds. And do you think that made him want to be on SCEC or be a Democrat? It did not. He registered as an independent, drat him, when he turned 18. We have to increase and bring in and actively go out and recruit people with disabilities of different cultures and different languages and different ways of being and different cultures into the Kentucky Democratic Party. That's how we grow. That's how we win. And more importantly, that's how we do our job and be good Democrats. The focus should be on equity versus equality. We've all seen the little thing that shows a fence and a really tall guy looking over the fence, and then 2 equal-sized boxes that they put the shorter people on. Well, someone who's just a little bit shorter can stand on that box and also see, but the third person who's very short stands on the box and can't see. That's equality. Everyone gets the same box. Equity is where we give each person a box that's tall enough that they can all see over the fence. And it's that simple. We want to make joining and participating easy. We want to speak openly about our welcoming nature and our intent. We want your family to come in. We want persons with a physical disability to be able to access our meetings. We want people who are hard of hearing to have translators. We want you to join us. And you have to go out and talk very openly about your welcoming nature. You need to encourage communications about behaviors that may be inadvertently harmful, like having the buzzing lights, and people with autism couldn't come to our meetings because that buzzing harmed them. And it took somebody finally being brave enough to send me an email and explain. I was like, oh, we'll change the bulbs. And that brought 10 people regularly to my meeting. It was that simple. It was asking, understanding, fixing. Try to include diversity and cultural competency in your mission statement, in your actions, and in your elections. When you're recruiting, when you're GOTV working, when you're getting volunteers to go out and canvass, be very intentional in your diversity and cultural competency, because the days where some Democrats said they don't have an alternative, everybody who has any difference of any kind has to vote for us, Democrats, have long passed if they ever existed. And we need to actively go out and prove that we are diverse, that we are culturally competent, and that we are respectful and welcoming. And as importantly, that we really, really, really want you to join us. Not just for votes, but because you bring something of value to us.
Hey there. If you've gotten this far, please send an email to annawhites@aol.com saying, I got this far. That way we'll have a record of your completion of the course. Thanks.
And we've come to the end of my hour, and I really appreciate you spending time with me. I love when I can do these live and take questions, because I always get a lot of very good questions that really make me think. So please feel free to email your questions. You have my email there or my office phone number there. There is no cost to anyone calling to ask a question, whether that is, will you look at our policy, or so-and-so did this, is this harassment? I will answer them all to the best of my ability. You do need to remember, and I give this with every speech I give, I am an attorney. I'm not your attorney. I'm just a helpful attorney who's going to answer your questions. But if it's something specific and you need a lawyer, I will tell you that and recommend you go get an attorney of your own if you've gotten yourself in trouble. But other than that, shoot me questions, comments, discussions, and have a wonderful year. I really, really am proud of the work you do and look forward to seeing what 2023 brings all of us. Talk to you soon.